Hi, and welcome to an episode of the Jet Rails podcast. I'm Robert, your host, and today I'm joined by a recent guest who was on the show. I've got Subbu from the Zycata team here with me, and we're going to be diving into a different topic that we touched on in the last episode. And after we finished recording, I was like, I wanted to dive in deeper. It was something that I almost a little unexpected for me. So we will be chatting a little bit about CDNs and failure. Today. So, there is a lot of redundancy built into the e-commerce industry, into the web industry as a whole, but we still see lots of outages of major companies. And, we're going to be talking about how you can or can't build redundancy when it comes to your content delivery network. So your CDN is really serving up so much of your website today, of your e-commerce site, that if it's having trouble, or at least having trouble in different regions of the world, your users are probably getting very frustrated very quickly. And whether we're talking about Akamai, Cloudflare, CloudFront, Fastly, all these big companies, there is no such thing as foolproof, that everyone goes down at some point for some reason. With no further ado, so would you dive in a little bit on this and tell us a little bit about, what even a failover for a CDN looks like, given that the whole purpose of a CDN is to be distributed on the edge, to have copies of files all over, in many cases, all over the globe on different servers.
Totally, Robert. First of all, thanks for having me. I really enjoyed our last podcast, and this is a very favorite topic for me specifically. Like you said, CDN reserve. The whole idea is that we use CDN because we want CDNs to protect us. And I would quote Matthew Prince, CEO of Cloudflare. In my view, that's the most honest way to acknowledge the problem. It happens to everybody. So if you take, if I just geek out a little bit, if you take a large time window, whether it's 1 month, 2 months, 6 months, a year, over a large time window, any big network will have some kind of an outage, whether it's a partial outage, whether it's a complete blackout, but outages are happening all the time, right? And the important thing was, me coming, like myself, I'm coming from the CDN industry. I've worked in some of the top CDNs around the globe. And one thing that I've always seen, is that it's a probability game. While you can't avoid an outage, you can definitely plan to manage that outage, because the likelihood of two CDNs going down at the same time is it's close to zero.
At that point, we probably have bigger problems. I mean, I think, when Godzilla attacks, you just have to accept that the internet's going to have some issues.
That's true. So, going back to the question, CDN outages are, so before we jump into CDN outages, I think you raised a really good question. Why are we even using a CDN? We're using CDNs because they replicate the content close to the edge. If you have one server or maybe 10 servers in your cloud, CDNs have hundreds of thousands of servers. So when we say CDN outage, are we really saying all the servers are down? That's not what we mean by outages, right? We are talking about some service glitch. We're talking about one region having some network issues, something to that effect, which would translate into an outage or an SLA problem for the CDN, but it translates into a business crisis for the e-commerce companies or cloud SaaS companies. So the first thing is, we all know that the problem happens, but what do you do about the problem? Right? How do you even know the problem happens? Right? I think that's the question that you're raising is,
because it's got to be tough to monitor, because as opposed to having one server to monitor uptime on, if you're trying to monitor, a CDN that's got servers all over the globe and it's in all these different regions that they're serving content from, that onto itself brings a big challenge.
That is the way you articulated it. I would say that's the epicenter of the problem. So if you want to even know that, if you want to manage an outage, the first thing you want to know is there an outage? So how do you answer that question, right? And we can just say it's 42, the answer to all the magical questions. But the thing is, CDNs are very, very complex. It's run by some of the top, and I'm saying that with full respect. I know some of these people who are running these companies, and they are just incredibly smart when it comes to running network at scale. So if they're having an outage, it's a non-trivial problem. I can promise you that. It's a problem that cascades multiple internet service providers, BGPs, some data center outage. It's a massive problem.
It's not just Homer Simpson fell asleep, eating his donut at the control panel.
Right. So I think the first thing is, how do you even understand that a massive network like that is having a problem, right? So we, coming from the CDN, we understood what it means, or how to even measure an outage for the CDN, and we took the exact point that you talked about. We basically divided the content set into static content and dynamic content. So if you're going to make a test, static content would be responded by the CDN, but dynamic content will almost always must be responded by the cloud. And we took this together and we started to tell, is an outage happening? Means, is it because the cloud is having an outage? Maybe your servers are having the problem. CDNs really are not having the problem. So we started to analyze the problem, and we would make sure that, is this a network issue? Is this a pairing issue? Is this a bandwidth problem? Or is this really a CDN problem? And if it's a CDN problem, is that a regional problem or it's a global problem? Based on all those analysis, right, we have this a product called Cloud Monitoring Service. What it basically does is, we have a global network. We are in, we are almost everywhere except China and Africa, I should say. And we measure our peer CDNs through our customers' traffic, right? And we're trying to understand, are you healthy? If the CDNs are healthy, that's great. But if they're not healthy, then we do all these filters. We assess the problem is local, global, static, dynamic. And then we would manage the problem. So that's the first thing. It's like you said, it's not about you having 5 URLs that's constantly pinging and trying to assess whether a CDN is down. You're not going to be able to find it. Right? You got to have a peer-to-peer testing, a dense network testing another dense network without causing a lot of phantom traffic.
Interesting. So at that point, you're testing the static content that should be coming from the CDN, and you're doing that around the globe so that you're getting a more real assessment. What happens if there is an outage? What happens if there is, and even maybe it's latency? Are you watching for just outage? Is it for other metrics like a slowdown of the content being served? What's the metric there that says that this is not working?
Yeah. Actually, we first started we kind of, since the problem is very complex, we first reduced the problem scope to just pure outage, not even performance degradation. We just said, can we absolutely tell whether the problem is with the CDN or with the cloud? That was the first thing that we wanted to nail. And as we got that done, our customers asked the exact same question that you just asked me. Hey, Zycoda, is it possible that you can actually switch the traffic, not just to Zycoda, but another CDN too, if one of my CDNs, they're having a performance problem, right? So you are absolutely right. There is a performance-based traffic switching, and there is health-based traffic switching. So when we come and tell customers today, we are saying that first get one problem right, which is, first let's get the outage out of the way, and then comes the performance, which is a very critical problem to solve. We will definitely,
we all know speed translates into e-commerce revenue. So as it does for most other types of conversion rates on other types of websites, and I know we touched on that in our last episode together, but and I'm also wondering, because when I think CDN, yes, it's serving the content, but your average content delivery network today is doing a lot more than that. You're tied in with your SSLs. You're tied in with firewalling DDoS prevention, bot mitigation, all kinds of things coming out of the CDN, things that affect security, that affect PCI compliance, and not just uptime, and also not just speed. How does that complicate the ability to mitigate, when they're, basically to have a failover, when you're relying on all these third-party solutions?
Exactly, Robert. I think, the first thing as an e-commerce merchant you should definitely worry about is what kind of a contingency plan I should have if my CDN goes down, right? A basic solution would be, if you can magically figure out that the problem is with the CDN outage, what is it that you can do today, right? One thing you can do is you can go to your DNS, you can make the DNS change directly to your origin, which we almost always know that's a terrible idea, because then you're going to expose your mothership to all unwanted elements on the internet who are constantly prying, which is the real reason you put a CDN in front of you.
And you're, in terms of your scalability and what have you, you're putting a lot more stress even without the security implications on that origin server, or servers, that you're there. Back to layers of complexity that you always want to reverse proxy. You always want that server to be, or whatever those origin servers where your databases and things are hosted, to be obfuscated and properly hidden. You really want to avoid sending unnecessary traffic to them, and you may not have load tested for those servers to be able to handle all that.
Very, very true. And, I'm sure from the way you are explaining, I can feel the battle scars, the scar tissue you're carrying.
Well, not so much in my JetRails days, that there's a lot of best practice here that is followed to the T. But, some of the gray, or maybe we'll call them silver hairs that I have coming in, they're from early days.
No,
absolutely.
I think you totally nailed it. So one is, that's the absolute brain dead solution, is to get the traffic onto your origin, which is not a good option to begin with, right? Because like you said, yes, even if you believe that you can detect that there is a CDN outage, and you can believe that you have the ability to handle the traffic without a CDN, what is the economics of that? Let's think about this, right? So if you're going to deliver all that content from your cloud, your egress cost would just skyrocket. Because the egress from Amazon Azure is not the same as the egress from your CDN. So as a merchant, we all know that you are in a cutthroat competition. You are thinking about saving that extra penny that you can lower your customer acquisition cost and whatnot. Are you going to burn all that when your CDN goes down? And if you are doing that, that tells me all the more why you must need a sound contingency plan that enables you to do that without burning your wallet. Right.
Yeah. And so without leaving your doors wide open with, turning off firewalling, or, opening yourself up to DDoS attacks or other things that, the amount of traffic that's already hitting your site that's bot traffic that you don't realize because your firewalls and systems are properly preventing it. You don't even realize in a lot of cases. So, you're keeping your PCI compliance and other things intact even during an outage of some sort from the CDN, that you don't want to give that up.
Very true. And in fact, I'll tell you one more thing. Almost all responsible hosting providers like you guys and all big e-commerce merchants have very tight, I'm going to call it ACL, access control list, where you would configure your platform to only take traffic from specific endpoints of a CDN, because you don't want to, even by mistake, a packet that's kind of probing, to get a response from your mothership, because then the hacker would know that you exist, right? So it's not about you blindly, A, finding that a CDN is having an outage, B, just switching the DNS to your origin. It's not that simple, because even if you do that, you got to change your firewall ACL rules and all of it.
That's right. It's not instantaneous, and it comes with some risk and some pain. That can all. It's a risk analysis at that point. What's the least painful? Wait out the problem, or make these changes, and those are tough decisions to be making on the fly.
Right.
That's always, I think, the hardest part is figuring that out on the spot.
Yeah. So clearly that's not a good option. So we can rule that out as even a contingency plan of switching that traffic to the origin. So then what you're left with is, do you want to configure 2 CDNs? Configuring multiple CDNs is non-trivial task in itself, because configuring one CDN is a full-time job for your operations team. Now, configuring 2 CDNs with 2 different APIs with 2 different things, it's non-trivial. Yeah. So we ourselves coming from the CDN world, Robert, is why we took one big design goal for ourselves was not to add any additional burden. We want to call it like zero burden on the operations team when you're putting this contingency plan in place. So that's why we designed, like our CDN reserve was designed specifically where operations people won't even see a dip in the traffic. So the traffic would look like you don't have a CDN reserve. It's going to look like there is only one CDN, except when an outage happens, we would detect it. Now, instead of making all the traffic go to your origin, we're going to take the traffic, we're going to shield your mothership, and we're going to still be on the lookout for your primary CDN to be up. And then as soon as the primary CDN comes out, we're going to get the traffic back to the primary CDN, right? Mm-hmm. So we kind of thought about what is needed to really put a solution in place. Like you said, the first thing is the most difficult one is, how do you understand a CDN is having an outage or not? Because it's a complex, very, very complex system. Please don't think that we can go to some cloud monitoring service and have some URLs and test it. It's more complex than that. Second, once you detect it, do you need a fallback network that can take over the traffic? So, what should that look like, and what kind of pressure it's going to put on your operations team? If you're going to issue purge on the primary CDN, are you going to issue purge on the CDN reserve, which is not even on your mental map, right? So you need to come up with a system that is completely agnostic, that it only comes to life when the primary CDN is suffering an outage, does its job, and then goes away, as if you
and it works.
And it works.
Yeah, I know a lot of businesses that have had a lot of pain with something. I don't know how similar, but when they're setting up more of a dual WAN situation, when they've got 2 different internet connections coming into the office because they want to have a failover. That, let's say, whoever the provider is, Comcast goes down and you fail over to AT&T or Hotwire or this or that, and and chances are that when the problem actually happens, it's not going to fail over properly. It's not going to work. Nobody's maintaining it. Nobody's checking that that modem hasn't been reset in a year and it's not connected properly, and it's not. And one of the accounts, the backup account is too slow and can't handle the traffic for your office anyway. And, so you wind up in this situation where, you go through years of iteration just to figure that, that your router isn't actually going to understand that there's a problem with one of the connections, and to fail over to the next properly, that's not really automated the way that a lot of people think with most routers and solutions that take some human intervention, because it might not even be hard down. It's latency. It's extremely slow, that the bandwidth is at a crawl. It's not hard down. And so these are I'm equating this, between the two as, the people, and that's with single lines, right? That's not dealing with monitoring, hundreds or thousands of servers that could be having issues around the globe in different data centers run by the edge network that the CDN is running from. So, it is for me just digesting it an interesting topic. And when it comes,
I would say, Robert, like one other point I want to add is we need 3 critical elements, right, to kind of have a contingency plan. Like, one is, how do you detect? Do you have a fallback network that you can map the traffic to? Third one, in my view, is the most important one, is how do you automatically do the switching when that happens, right? So you need to put the DNS in place. You need to have the DNS mapping around it. That's tied to the monitoring service, that's tied to the edge platform.
Yeah, so and you don't want to be making DNS changes on the fly. It takes some time to propagate. Might be cached in different places, and and so that might not really trying to do that on the fly might not really, especially for a temporary issue, really solve the way that you want either. If anything, now you've got users hitting all sorts of different places.
Very, very true.
You can't even predict what they're hitting at that point.
Yeah, exactly. So, it's a very, very complex thing to solve. And very interestingly, being in the CDN space, I did not think about this problem for a long time. You always think that outage happens, it's way of life, right? Till your customer tells you, I'm now completely of the opinion that you must always listen to your customer, because he is coming from the pain, right? He's having an outage, the CDN, he's running to you, he's talking about this, you listen. And you think about it, and you think about how to help the person. So we were constantly thinking, these guys are using top CDNs. Mm-hmm. They are having outages. So if it's a simple problem, then it's not an issue. The very fact that person comes to you, is talking to you about it, means that he has already thought about the problem. So we worked with our customers, Robert, in putting the solution together. Was we actively worked with them. We tried to understand that point, the constraints around it. You talked about PCI compliance. You talked about all the compliance. First of all, the other backups should have all of that, which makes it a credible platform to take your traffic. Then, does it have the intelligence to seamlessly do the shift without increasing the burden on your operations team? And having two contracts with the CDN, with two separate CDNs, is very expensive. So we thought about all of this. And out of goodwill, we rolled out the solution. And we called it the CDN Reserve. And we are finding that customers are loving it,
Well, if you've figured out how to do this in a way that that's not costing, basically the full ride for two CDNs, I think that's a lot of the challenge. Is that for maybe what might equate to a few days a year, it can be hard to justify certain expense. But that's so I imagine that the cost of having the resource is one issue. I imagine also, there's the fear that, back to those backup lines I was talking about, in terms of network connections, that, if your backup line isn't really powerful enough and isn't going to check the boxes, it's not really going to be that much better than the outage. That's another issue. So if they're failing over, what is the expectation in terms of performance decrease, or, what you're providing? Is it more or less, on par with what they'd be getting from their traditional CDN?
Yeah, perfect. So what we do is we first, so the answer is yes. For the static content, we would also be caching, so they're going to get the same performance like the other CDN. But the real thing that we want to actually help them understand is the mindset that you need to be thinking about right now is this as good as my CDN? Or is my situation getting better? So I don't want to really go and compete saying that, hey, if say Cloudflare or Akamai is caching you, and then all of a sudden you go to a backup CDN, your thinking should not be whether the performance is going to be as good, because you are now dealing with an outage or a crisis. So I think the mental model you should have is, will my site be up when my competitor's site is down? That is the mentality, right? If every second you are up when your competition is down, ask any e-commerce merchant, what does that mean to them? That's the time you run promotions. That's the time you do push notifications, because you know your competition is down. So how do you turn a crisis into an opportunity, right? I mean, that's what we people do at business, right? We look for crisis. Every crisis is an opportunity that's waiting to be solved, right? So that's the mentality that we should be thinking about. But you asked a really interesting question. So if you're okay with it, Robert, I'm going to double click into that on.
Absolutely.
I really believe that CDNs are phenomenal. I am not the guy who's going to say, don't ditch your CDN, come to Zyka. I don't think that should be the mental model. The mental model you should have is use the tool that it was built for. CDNs are built for caching static content. They are best at it. No questions around it. CDNs are built for having a stable network. They are best at it. Does it mean outages won't happen? Outages will happen. That's a different question, right? everything in this universe, there are things that will break all the time. That's just the way of life. Those are great. But what is it that you have a gap there is CDNs are not designed for accelerating dynamic interactive traffic. So if you have a way where you put a CDN reserve in place, you put all the static content on your existing CDN, and you put all the dynamic traffic on a dynamic content accelerator, say like Zycata, then what you really get is the world's fastest and the most highly available e-commerce site. Isn't that worth it? And if you are it and your competition is not, that's all the more why you should do it faster. Just think about what it means to you, right? I mean, as compared to do I need it or do I not need it? A new tool is there. How are you going to use that tool to maximize your success? That's the lens that I would like people to look at.
Yeah, it's, for many, many years now, I've lived in South Florida where we know we have to be ready for a hurricane, and we hope it won't be a particularly bad one or set of them in a season, but you prepare. And it's not that, you couldn't live off of crackers and water for a week or something, but you set yourself up to be able to be as comfortable and healthy and well off as you can be in those kind of circumstances. And I think, and our businesses do the same, that, and whether we're talking about having generators or doing other things, that they don't do it for fun. That I'm sure, a lot of people wouldn't mind having a few days at home in most cases, because, in most cases, that's what it is. But, we want to be able to operate. We want to be able to service customers and do good things. And so, while JetRails being headquartered in Chicago probably deals with more ice storms than hurricanes. But, really, I think every business has certain contingency plans for certain things and has certain failovers for certain things. When we talked last time, I recognized, it was before Black Friday and the holiday shopping season. We were talking about things, being ready, and the thought that, your average merchant doesn't really have a failover plan for their CDN is really interesting. And I think, given how this technology is coming about and that you don't necessarily need to pay full ride for two CDNs, that there's a lot of merit to that, to being able to make it feasible. Because that's the other part, not only the physicality of, like you said, of monitoring and properly cutting over to the right things at the right time, but then monetarily that, if you make it cost prohibitive, well, that becomes a hard pill to swallow. Well, and, because that's also the assumption is that, well, I'm going to need equal setups on both sides, that it's going to need to be equivalent. But if you're more so paying for usage and such, or, treating it more like, like a true failover, which, I mean, here, with JetRails, we have auto scaling. And so we have users in the cloud, AWS, what have you, that, where it's elastic and self-healing and dealing with that. But we also have bare metal users that don't want to pay for extra servers all year long just to use them in Q4 for the holiday shopping season. So we add booster servers at the end of the year when they need them, spin them down when they're done, and they only pay for what they were actually in need of. And they don't have to pay for hardware all year long that they don't need all year long. I find that, merchants are a lot more prepared for more of that usage model where something is built around their actual needs and they're not trying to more or less overconsume.
Robert, I think I'll just add one point here, which I think is very critical. I think the way you expressed it, I really liked it. When merchants know, when they can predict that they will have a traffic surge, and they can predict that they can do it, okay, they're expecting something to happen, they almost always have a contingency plan. They call you, they request that I need some extra servers, and you're happy to help them. The question here is, you can't predict. It's interesting you gave the Florida example.
Well, you can and you can't. You can. It's kind of like hurricane season. You can predict that if you live in Florida for a few years, you're going to see some hurricanes. And so you can predict that you want to be prepared for that, but you can't predict when.
Exactly. Like I me living in California, I always map it to earthquakes, right? We know it's going to happen. We just don't know when. but you must have a contingency plan.
This is where I start shaking the camera for effect, right?
So it's important. So that's why we kept the price low. We want to make sure that that's not a problem for a lot of merchants. Right? I mean, big merchants, they don't. We have two plans. We have an enterprise plan for the big boys, and we have a basic plan for the smaller merchants. The only reason we have basic plan, Robert, is to help a lot of these smaller merchants who need that capability. Bigger merchants, they have the sophistication, and they can actually play the
basically, game. No merchant wants, I don't know, whichever social media of the day, no one wants to be flooded with shoppers on Twitter complaining that they can't access today's sale or whatever's going on. Like no one wants to be dealing with the aftermath of those things. No one wants their phones ringing with that. Their reviews suffering from that. These things, again, economies of scale. When dollar for dollar you can solve these problems reasonably, it makes sense. Probably a good time to mention that for those of our listeners and viewers that are JetRails subscribers, this is something you can bring up with your account manager, and something that we're happy to talk to you about, and to see where your account stands in terms of your CDN and failover. So we do have options there of testing things and doing things with you. But so this has been a lot of fun, like our last conversation. As with the last time, before we wrap up, any final thoughts, anything we didn't touch on that you think is really impactful on this topic? Or did we really check all the boxes today?
I mean, I think we did check all the boxes. One thought that I want to leave with your audience is, we are living in a world where being slow is the new outage. If being slow is considered as bad as having an outage is definitely not acceptable. And, if it's going to be a no-brainer solution that you can have a contingency plan that's going to increase your availability and performance, why not take advantage of that, right? So with that, I want to say we are here as partners, and we are here to help you guys succeed.
Awesome. Look, anybody that works servers knows, we set hard drives and RAID configurations. There's failovers for failovers for failovers in these networks. That's what this industry is built on. So while, sometimes I worry that, it's hard when we all start going down that rabbit hole about worrying about this or worrying about that. But in reality, we're solving business problems. That this is, the same way that we talk in e-commerce about things like credit card fraud and all these things, that they happen. And you don't want to be suffering from them. You just want to be ready to operate successfully and happily. So always great to see new stuff like this coming out. Thank you again for joining. And for our audience, as always, thanks for tuning in. Stay safe, stay healthy, and happy selling out there.